All right. Welcome, all of you that are hopping on this little live stream that we have here on Neighbors of the Network here on Network Effects. I'm James Pinedo, your host, and today we have a very special guest. Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Christina Sandefur is the Executive Vice President at the Goldwater Institute. She develops policies and litigates cases advancing healthcare freedom, free enterprise, private property rights, free speech, and taxpayer rights. Christina's accomplishments and activities include co-drafting the Right to Try initiative, co-authoring the book Cornerstone of Liberty, Private Property Rights in 21st Century America, receiving the 2018 Buckley Award in recognition of her leadership in the freedom movement, serving as an advisory board member of the Network of Enlightened Women, and much more. So, Christina, I'm so excited. Thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Well, so am I, and there's so much we can talk about your accomplishments, but I really want to dive into your story. I want to know more about Christina. So, tell me, how did you grow up? Well, how did that shape you?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because my upbringing was very impactful when it comes to my beliefs and my zeal for liberty and the job that I do today. I am the product of recent immigrant families on both sides. Both my mother's and father's family came to the United States in the early and mid 1900s. So they relatively new, came from Europe, mostly Italy. My maternal great grandmother was really an inspiration to me. I was fortunate to have her around for quite some time. She was almost 100 years old when she passed, and she grew up in rural Italy. She actually left Italy to escape Mussolini's fascism that was growing at the time. And she told me time and time again how fortunate I was to be a woman in the United States. And of course, I was quite young. I didn't quite appreciate what she was saying until I got a little bit older. But she just said, a woman in the US can be whatever she wants to be. Of course, my great grandmother was a very smart and wonderful person, but she never learned to read or write. She didn't get to have a job. By the time she came to the US, it was kind of too late for those things, but she did not have any kinds of freedoms that we take for granted here today. So I kept that in mind. On my father's side of the family, they were small business owners, as a lot of immigrants tend to be. And, neither of my parents were college educated. They worked in family businesses. They always worked. They always, saved up and bought what they could afford. And both of them really just instilled in me values of hard work, but also of gratitude. They were,
Mhm.
both said that they were just so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to put food on their table and we're excited that their children had an opportunity to again kind of create the life that they wanted to have. So um, we never, funnily enough, we never talked politics growing up. I had no idea who my parents voted for until much later in life, until I started dabbling a little in politics and got out of that very quickly when I realized that was not traditional politics wasn't for me and I wanted to do policy. But I just, it really didn't matter though, because it was the philosophy, it was the love for freedom, it was the love for everything that America stood for, that just really left a deep impression on me. And so growing up, I always had a fascination with the American founding. I loved history. I loved getting into the principles of the American founding. Later on, getting into a little bit about economics and how those things translate into how we work with each other and how we earn a living, and how you can't just take things from people, but you have to convince them, produce something that's a value that they want, in exchange for their hard-earned money. And I really just grew up with so much gratitude to be in this country, because I know that a lot of my family, my recent family, did not have those types of freedoms, and especially being a woman in the United States. Gosh, even in 2024, I have a lot of gratitude and a lot of perspective. So that was my upbringing, just kind of observing how my parents lived their lives, the gratitude that they had, and then finding on my own why America was such a good fit for folks like that, and why America kind of allowed them to shape the lives that they wanted to have, and in turn gave me the freedom to be able to do the same.
It's so fragile and special, isn't it? That
It really is.
American founding. We were watching, my wife and I were watching Napoleon on Apple TV this past weekend. And that just, you walk away from that, and we didn't enjoy the movie. We didn't get through it. I understand if someone enjoyed it, but we didn't get through it. And that's the good thing about streaming is you can just click away really
Yes.
fast. But you still walk away, even with the few minutes that we watched, thinking about we are really lucky with our American Revolution. Like
Yep.
comparing that to the French Revolution, it's something completely different. Ah, I wonder, what was it that you saw about the American Revolution back? So yeah, I know this is tough going back and in, young Christina, but what was exceptional about it that really caught your interest besides the benefits that you were experiencing? Like what
Yeah.
caused those benefits maybe?
Well, you know what I liked about it, and obviously this is a child sort of
Sure.
looking at the very basics, but
Yeah.
I liked that this was, I mean, these were obviously very intelligent, very devoted people, but the people who really served as our American founders, whether they be our intellectual founders or the people who were actually, participating in the Boston Tea Party and
Mhm.
participating in the Continental Army, or the folks that were drafting our Declaration of Independence. I mean, these were average people. And,
Mm. Hmm.
and that really resonated with me because again, my family, we were average people.
Mm.
We were fortunate in many ways, don't get me wrong. I always, even during times when we struggled a little when I was growing up, we always had a roof over our head. I always felt safe and I'm very lucky for that. But my parents weren't rich. They didn't really have a lot of connections. They were average people, but they just believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed in something extraordinary, and I liked that about the American founding is
Mm.
that these were people that I could see my parents had they been born in a different place and at a different time, or myself, participating in such a way, and I like that, and I like that. I mean, despite what some people may say about, needing to translate the Constitution or whatever, when you open up the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, it really is written in a way that we can understand today. It's written in plain English, so to speak, right? I mean, and I like that. I mean, these are concepts that we can debate and discuss, obviously, uh, for an infinite amount of time. But at the end of the day, these are basic concepts that normal people, came up with and promulgated and fought for. And you hear a lot of talk about sort of that the American founding was, is based on the lives of privileged people. And again, I don't want to diminish the fact that it doesn't, the people who participated in the founding don't necessarily look like Americans today. But it's just, it's not true to say that these were all aristocrats or anything like
Right.
that. I mean, again, these are people of very humble origin, many of these folks, business people, people who were not educated formally in any way, fighting for something that, fighting for freedom. And so, yes, that's what really appealed to me. I could relate to that
Yeah.
as a child.
Well, the thing that strikes me, especially, is your parents weren't political, and you said you
Yeah.
could see your parents participating in something like the American founding, and that
Yeah.
shows. I think that's really key because we're talking about folks, our founding fathers, who were not activists, they were not revolutionaries,
Yep.
they
Yep.
weren't going out trying to overthrow everything that they see. It seems like when you look at it, they were always saying, like, what can we do to possibly the least amount of disobedience, the least amount of civil disobedience we can do. Like, and then it's
Yep.
like from that gradation, like, oh my gosh, we need to do something drastic. But they weren't looking for that. And that's really, I don't know how that happened, but I'm sure we could talk so much more about that. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Tell
Well,
me.
yeah, I will
Yeah.
just say real quick, it's both it's beautiful and devastating when
Mm.
people are pushed to that point. I think the same theme in the American founding you really find in, one of the books that really speaks to me. I like to read Ayn Rand, but We the Living, people cite, Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead. But if you read We the Living, of course, it's about a young woman who was similar in the sense that, she's growing up under the oppression of the Soviet Union, and she does not want to be political. She's not
Mhm.
political. She doesn't want to be forced into politics or political meetings or subversion or anything like that. She just wants to live her life in peace. And to me, one of the tragedies about the story is that because of the world that she's in, because of the government that she lives under, she's forced to become essentially a political activist. And I think, but again, it's political, not in the sense that we think of today. And I think the American founding, is similar. And so it's amazing that I mean, it's because, I think sometimes we forget that today we lack the perspective that because we're so comfortable and we're so safe, and despite
Yeah.
the fact that our rights are constantly threatened, they're still relatively protected here in the United States compared to other countries or other times
Mhm.
in our past. And so it's easy to become kind of like complacent and, and comfortable. We don't really always feel like we need to fight for our rights because we're not forced into that situation. And of course, we don't want people to be forced into that situation. We want them to be free to focus on things like we are talking about, like,
Right.
a job and our families and having fun and creating art and thriving. But it's a double-edged sword because, of course, the more comfortable we get, the more that we forget that our freedoms are very precious and very fragile.
Absolutely. So fragile.
Yes,
Okay. Well, we could talk so much more, but I want to get back to your story a little bit, and then maybe we can talk about these big ideas more.
sure.
But you're talking about, or you're focused on this gratefulness, which resonates with so many people within the network. And you're
Yeah.
growing up, and you love history, and then it's time to go to college. And what happens then? Take me through that.
Yeah, believe it or not. So as I had mentioned, neither of my parents had gone to college. So I went through that process kind of on my own. And believe it or not, what led me to thinking about that I might be able to have a career along these lines is my high school economics, my AP economics class. The teacher was well, he was sort of a Keynesian, which I guess is not uncommon in a public school. The funny thing is, I look back now and I think at least I had access to an economics class in high school, as I think many students don't at all. But, you know, he was teaching us that, well, if there's a problem in the economy or if there's a concern, it's all about manipulating on the macro level. Like, what does government have to do to get us back to, where we want to be? And it just, something about that seemed so wrong to me. Again, because I
Mm,
had been
mm,
a student of the American Revolution, because I'd seen what my parents, how they had lived their lives. And when you think about all the things that you learn throughout history and starting to read Ayn Rand at the time, and none of that really jived with this one size fits all sort of like, top down Keynesian macro approach to the economy. And this teacher didn't even pretend that there was any other way to look at things. So I went out there and tried to do my own research. Now, at the time, we didn't all have, laptops or smartphones or whatever. I had to go to the library for an internet connection. And so between doing that and getting some books and periodicals and things, I found Austrian economics and Ludwig von Mises, and found that lo and behold, there was this college called Hillsdale College that happened to be located in my home state, Michigan, a couple hours away from Metro Detroit, where I grew up. And they had Ludwig von Mises's personal collection that was brought over by Richard and Anna Ebling, actually from the USSR. So it was kind of neat to me, and I thought, wow, I'd love to go see that. And that just led to me really falling in love with the education that was provided at Hillsdale. So I decided to apply. I got in and went there, and that's really where I started to meet some really amazing professors, including Bert Folsom, who at the time I was a freshman, was also a freshman in the sense that he had just started teaching at Hillsdale College. He was doing a lot of research on Franklin Roosevelt and the Great Depression, and I helped him with some of that. And through that research, I said, gosh, I would really love, how do you do this for a living? I mean, I see you can become a professor. What else could you do? And he introduced me to the world of think tanks, which at the time was very different than it is today. But he introduced me to folks at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which is where he was a fellow. And that I got an internship in my first job in the freedom movement from the Mackinac Center doing public policy research. And that was it for me. I mean, once I started doing that, the question was just, what will I do in the freedom movement? But it wasn't ever
mm.
a question of, am I going to leave the freedom movement? So that was a really, really great introduction. I will say at the time, most organizations, including Mackinac, I mean, it was still a pretty substantial organization at the time, but most of us were traditional think tanks. We were doing research, writing white papers, which is critically important. Still, I believe we should all be doing that to this day. But I was sort of craving something a little more active. So thinking about people like, my family, people who were working hard and, facing regulation and facing taxes and, what can I do besides just research that is fun for me? How can I turn that research into reality? And so I actually met the Mackinac didn't have a litigation center at the time, but we had an attorney who's still there to this day, Patrick Wright, who was doing amicus briefs. And he said he was doing one in a property rights case that went to the US Supreme Court. And through all of that, we had an event where I met Clint Bullock, who I'm sure needs no introduction on this podcast at all. But of course, he was the co-founder of the Institute for Justice. And he is just an absolute legend in libertarian free market public interest litigation. And he told me, if you want to do something more active, why don't you go get a law degree and you can be a lawyer and you can sue the government for a living, which just sounded ideal to me. So yeah, that sounds great. So I went to law school, thanks to on the recommendation of Clint Bullock, and then I really lucked out because as I was graduating from law school, finishing up my law degree, he had just started the first litigation center at a state-based think tank at an SBN organization, which at the Goldwater Institute invited me to come on board and be one of the first attorneys at the Goldwater Institute shortly after graduation. And 15 years later, I'm still here. So doing different work, but still here. So I really owe a lot to him and to the Mackinac Center for launching my career.
Amazing. I want to go back a little bit. You said that when you were there interning with the Mackinac, you got your first job. You said you were hooked. What
Yeah.
was it that hooked you?
Well, I mean, so many things. One, all of the things that I like to do for fun, right? The things I like to read about and think about. I mean, people were getting paid to do that, so it was hard work. But I thought, I worked primarily reported to Larry Reed, who was the president at the time, and he let me write and research for a lot of articles. In fact, I think you can still find some of those really early articles that I wrote online on their website today, which is funny. And one of the things that I wrote about, I actually did quite a bit of research about the U.S. postal system because it really the monopolistic nature of it really offended me, and I thought, this is so crazy that it's illegal for people to compete with the post office. And, generally speaking, I didn't even think that we needed a government supported post office. But I think at the time, too, I was just thinking about, well, gosh, at the very least, why not let people compete? And that got me interested in school choice and other things like that. Like, even if we have government serving roles that I don't necessarily think it should serve, why not open that up for competition? It makes everything better. So I wrote an article about this and a little bit of the history of how folks had tried to compete with the post office throughout its history and done better than the post office, but of course had been punished for doing so. And it was the funniest thing. The article went up, and at the time, there wasn't Google alerts or anything like that. But however, the postal union employees found out they had some way to notify them that articles had been written about them and about the postal monopoly. And, I'm brand new. I'm in my 20s. I'm brand new in my career. Nobody cares what I have to say. And suddenly there's like hundreds of comments on this thing, and they're all postal workers. And, she lives in her ivory tower and she doesn't understand about, like how hard postal employees work, which of course was not a criticism in my article at all.
No.
Nothing about how hard postal employees work or how on earth would the market do XYZ and all of these things. And it was really exciting to me because here I am just barely starting a career and having people in government and adults that were 2 or 3 times my age commenting and arguing with me. And it wasn't intimidating. It was just exciting because I thought, wow, I wrote something that really, upset a lot of people, which must mean I said something important. And so I thought, gosh, I could do that. I mean, if I worked at a place like this, for my entire career, I mean, I'm just writing a little article. What if I worked on a law? What if, as Clint Bullock told me, go to law school? I mean, what if I, brought a lawsuit? I mean, you could really make a difference and change people's lives this way. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that's really what attracted me to it. And then also just the people that work there. And I feel this way, to this day about all of my colleagues in the movement. It's just a special kind of person because there's so many talented people that frankly could be making more money in the private sector if they did something else. But I mean, there's nothing like this kind of job and this kind of work. And they're so excited and so driven and so personally invested. That was something I witnessed too early on, is personally invested in the work. If they published something that got a media hit, or, that was picked up by a legislator, or like somebody introduced legislation based on one of their ideas or something like that, they were so excited, and vice versa. Like if we tried to do something and it didn't work out, or this law passed that we didn't want to pass, despite their efforts, they would be really upset about it. And it wasn't because their paycheck depended on it. It was because they cared so much about the work they were doing. So that's what got me hooked. I just thought, man, I could be paid to do something that I would do as a hobby. So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I have to ask, you're in your 20s and you publish your first article and you get criticism, like intense criticism, and you like it. I don't think that's what me speaking as a 20-year-old, and most 20-year-olds that I've met, I mean, I'm not 20 anymore, but me speaking, if I
yes.
was a 20, I would not like it. I would be intimidated. What was it about you which enabled you to be like, wow, this is cool? That seems different.
Well, I think that it was the fact again that, I mean, this wasn't my peers necessarily, right? It wasn't because in some ways when you're that age or even a little younger, it's almost more intimidating to have criticism from people your age because you're
Yeah.
still in that awkward phase where you're thinking about acceptance and
Hmm.
maybe trying to be cool, whatever else. So I mean, I certainly didn't enjoy having negative attention growing up from peers or from other students or things like that. I think what was different about this is if an adult or if somebody with a career or somebody in the government is reading something that I wrote, and not just saying, I mean, I'm sure some of the comments just said you're an idiot, but they really didn't know how old I was, and there wasn't any comments about, well, this person, this is just a kid and they don't know what they're talking about. It was more they were arguing on the merits of what I was talking about. I mean, they
Yeah.
were, and that was, I think that's why I was excited
Mm.
because I thought, well, they're taking me seriously, like
Mhm.
I mean, they totally disagree with me, but they take what I'm saying seriously, and I have adults and people with education and people that are in the system that are engaging with my ideas. And even though it was overwhelmingly critical, there were
Mhm.
very few positive comments on that article. It meant that they cared and they wanted to engage. And if they didn't care, they would just ignore me.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I thought I think that's why I was excited. And I just thought this is I had no idea what kind of platforms we could get as the internet grew and as our organizations got bigger and as we started litigating. But even just then, it just gave me a little taste of like, wow,
Mhm.
somebody like me, the first in my family to go to college, who just finds all of this so exciting, who wants so badly to do this work and make a difference, can put a little article out there and get this kind of response and attention. Like, wow, I want to, I want to see where I can take that.
Yeah, so much agency with that. You're
Yeah.
able to really enact something, put your stamp
Yes.
on it. What did your family, you said you referenced your family just now. Did they have a reaction to you going out and, pushing out and getting criticism and going, all young 20-year-old doing this?
I do remember, it's funny. Well, I'm very lucky that both of my parents were they always just wanted me to be happy and be the best that I could be at whatever I did. So I know some people get intense pressure from parents and family members to do specific things. And I never had that. I was always really hard on myself. So I do remember one time for spring break going to an economics conference when I was in college with my boyfriend at the time. He was also really into econ, and we went to like an Austrian economics conference for our spring break. And my mom, I remember saying, don't you just want to go to the beach? She's very much appreciated, that I was into school and wanted to do well and whatever. But I think if anything, they would just sometimes think, well, make sure you're having fun and enjoying life. But the thing is, I mean, that was fun to me, and I was really enjoying it. And I think just, growing up, I grew up with an autoimmune disease when I was very, very young. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and I mean, I still have it. It's not something that goes away. But when I was very little, I was actually told by doctors at the University of Michigan Research Hospital that I may not walk someday, that I definitely wouldn't ride a bike or run or do anything like that, and that like we should prepare for like a wheelchair life.
Wow.
And I underwent treatment, which, at the time was nothing like treatment for RA today. It was very rudimentary. But my mom just didn't treat me differently. She
Mm.
would, because movement is really important when you have joint problems. And if it hurt, sometimes, you would be tempted to be sedentary, but my mom would just push me to be as like normal as I could. And she always supported me a lot, but she was basically like, you can do whatever you want to do. It's just a matter of like, how much how much pain do you want to overcome to do it? And so
Mm.
like I would drop something and she'd be like, well, do you want to pick it up or do you want to just leave it on the floor? If you leave it on the floor, you won't feel the pain, but I'm not going to get it for you. And
Mm.
I'm so grateful for
Mm.
her for doing that, because it really just kind of instilled at a young age that there's like no limit to what you can achieve if you're willing to push through the pain and endure a little discomfort. And I got lucky because I did very well. I went into remission. I did ride that bike much, much later than most kids did. So like one day I had friends that wanted to ride bikes, and I didn't want to have training wheels because we were much too old to have training wheels. So I just got on the bike and like just rode it real fast until it didn't fall over, so that I, wasn't different. And again, that kind of it just instilled in me, you push, you should feel
Mhm.
grateful for the fact that, I mean, so many people do push and try and aren't lucky like I am. So I've just early on felt like grateful to have, the gift of movement, to have the freedom to be in the US, but also like a responsibility with that, because who knows what I would be doing today, if I did just sit around, or if I didn't have, parents that challenged me or that said, hey, it's going to hurt a little, but it's going to be worth it.
Mm.
And so I think, anyway, I mean, I think that's kind of, it all goes together, the physical and the mental, um, pain and perseverance. It's hard to draw a line between the two. I think they just all go together. And again, I'm fortunate that I had a supportive family, but also a family that, because they had to endure a lot too. I mean, my like I said, everybody in my family worked. They came to America to work. They came to America to make a better life. Nobody had anything handed to them. So they instilled that in me as well. And but it's liberating. I mean, I think you have two types of people. You have people that see that, or that see adversity or challenges as, a negative thing. They're
Mhm.
victimized by it, or it's too hard to overcome it. They focus on the negative. Or you can be somebody who sees it as an opportunity, and a chance to, kind of a freedom, right? Like if I
Mhm.
push, this might work out for me, and who knows what I can achieve. So I think a lot of freedom loving people choose the latter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. You learned so much from that, from your mom pushing you that way. It seems like
Yeah.
that mentality is just a thorough line from what you've told me so far, where you're introduced to Keynesian economics and you're like, well, that doesn't seem quite right. Let me keep pushing. And then, you publish your first article and you're like, let's keep pushing. We're making some traction here. Where did your mom learn? Like, was your mom like that too? Was she,
Yeah.
because she was the one that strikes me as incredible that she can say, no, no, I'm not going to pick that up. you have to pick it up or it stays on the ground. Like that is not easy to do. Like I
No.
my kids, it's hard. How did she learn to do something like that's incredible?
Yeah, gosh, it's so true. And she is a very, like, I mean, she's 100% Italian. So she's very caring, very loving. Like she's not a stoic person at all. So I'm
Mhm.
sure it was extremely hard for her. But I think she comes from a line of freedom loving strong women, because again, it was the women in her side of the family that really pushed to leave Italy and to come to the US. And it was the
Interesting.
women, it was kind of like a matriarchal family in the sense of like, there was a part of the family that owned a small business on her side as well. That they had like a restaurant, which is, stereotypical Italian, right? But yeah, it's like the women did so much of the work and so much of the leading the family and the business stuff. And I think, it's partially necessity, but partially just that's just the kind of upbringing that she had. And every woman, though, as the generations went on, just had more and more opportunity because, of
Right.
course, like when they first came over, it was a lot of hard work, but not a lot of choice. It was just all necessity. My mom, I would have loved to go to college. It wasn't something that she could do because she still had a lot of obligations to her family. And so rather than be bitter about it, she just, wanted me to just have all those opportunities and basically just always said, you know, push yourself as much as you're willing to because you can have, I mean, she did that and she got what she needed for her family. And then she kind of saw me as being able to have not only what I needed, but what I wanted. And there's this line in a letter that John Adams actually writes about this, and they crib from that letter and put it into the John Adams mini series on HBO. So you actually hear him speak it as well in that mini series. But he's talking about why they fought the revolution, and I wish I was the type of person that could just memorize quotes, but I can't. So I'm just paraphrasing. But he basically said, we fight this revolution so that our kids can then be like the architects of, a government that would, protect our rights so that their kids can then have a little bit more freedom to focus on careers. And so then their kids can have a
Mhm.
little bit more, time where they can focus on music and art and like really thrive.
Mhm.
And that was always one of my favorite things that he wrote because it made me think about my family. That's kind of the trajectory is like everyone worked really hard and little by little, we create a little more opportunity to have those choices and to go from surviving to thriving.
And that sounds like it was a cognizant daily choice where your family members, your mother and your grandma, and I'm sure your father as well, were just
Yeah.
all like pushing every day. And our
Yep.
does that still drive you as well? Like I'm thinking about my children and or my family. Does that still carry on with you?
It does. Yeah. I'm always grateful for them and and I don't always love the word sacrifice because I think that makes it sound like it's totally selfless. And I think my parents got a lot of joy out
Mm.
of doing things that would empower their kids to have good lives. Sadly, my dad passed away about a year ago, but he was always, I mean, he was very much the same. I think about him a lot because he worked very, very hard at a job his whole life that, he didn't love it, right? But he loved the fact that he could earn a living for his family and that we could do fun things together and that he could see like his kids have opportunities that he didn't have. And so I do think about that. I feel a lot of gratitude because not only do I get to, have a job that can also support my family and my life, but I love my job. And so I have, and it's because again of that like work ethic and because he and my mother both instilled those things in me. And just like I think, and again, this goes back to a philosophy of freedom and responsibility is that, they taught me that you don't always see results right away.
Mm.
So when I was trying to overcome, the issues with the arthritis, I mean, it's not like you could just push through pain one day and all of a sudden, you were running. In fact, I do run today. I love it. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I started running 3 years ago. So many, many, many years and decades after I was diagnosed with arthritis, but years of building up that strength and that endurance and finally got to that point. And I think the same is true with schooling and careers and anything else. So, they taught me to really have that long-term outlook, and that hard work does eventually pay off, but it doesn't, it's short-term pain for a long-term gain, right? But I saw that in the way they lived their lives, and
Mm.
they didn't just go out and buy things on credit. These days we have to. There's really no way around it, but gosh, they would just save up. I remember when
Mm.
they paid off the house that I grew up in. And every single month they would make the house payment, and then one day they paid it off. And it was a
Wow.
very modest house, but they were so excited. And they told me, they're like, this is great because now we own this house and nobody can take it away from us. Of course, the government could take it away from them. But it was just like, we bought this, we worked really hard, we didn't own it right away. But now we own it. And gosh, I mean, that instilled in me even just fiscal responsibility. I was always really careful with money for that exact reason, because I thought, how cool is it to pay things off and then they're yours and you can do whatever you want with them and nobody can come take them.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And there's three different ways I can go with that because they're all great. But let me go with way number one. Sharon just dropped a great question based upon what you just spoke about running. She's wondering
Yes.
how many running miles have you logged so far for 2024?
It's funny. I don't actually know that off the top of my head, but I can actually pull up my Strava and tell you, it looks like almost 500 miles so far this year.
Ooh.
So
That's amazing. Not bad, not bad at all. Okay, Sharon. Well, thanks for that question. I want to go back to Goldwater, and then I want to speak about what you just spoke about, the home ownership and how that was so important to your parents, because I'm sure that influenced your book, which is
yeah,
fascinating.
so
And
much so.
I'd love to talk about that. But tell me a little bit about Goldwater. So you said you moved there when the litigation team was new and everything is like
Yes.
it's kind of fresh. Can you take me through how what that was 15 years ago and kind of
Yeah.
maybe the cliff notes? That's a lot of time. I'm sure a lot
Yes,
happened.
I know. We could do hours just on that evolution. But well, when I first started at the Goldwater Institute, I started as an attorney, and the physical building we were housed in, which we fortunately own, in Central Phoenix, was so empty that we were actually thinking about renting some of the offices out to other organizations. And fast forward to today, our building has undergone several physical renovations since I've been here. We have a significant amount of remote staff that lives in other states as well. And we still need more space, which is always a good problem to have. So we've grown tremendously. When I first started,
Congratulations. Wow.
thank you so much. Yeah, it's just been really great to watch. So yes, when I first started, we had done a little bit of legislative work. Of course, education savings accounts, school choice, ESAs, born in Arizona, and something that, since Goldwater's founding, education has been a critically important issue to the organization. So we did a little bit of that, but mostly, again, it was traditional white papers. Clint Bullock started our litigation center. And we were primarily using what the reason I wanted to come work here instead of an organization like IJ or Institute for Justice or Pacific Legal Foundation, which are both phenomenal organizations, is because I was intrigued by using state constitutions in order to
Mm.
protect freedom. And so Goldwater really pioneered that approach, the idea that yes, we have a federal constitution that protects our rights, but federal courts often get it wrong. And our founders didn't just give us one constitution, they give us 51, so to speak, meaning that the states are, the last resort for when the federal government fails to protect your rights. And then, of course, the states have powers. They can come in, protect people's rights to a greater extent than the federal constitution, even because the federal constitution is the floor for the protection of our rights. It's not the ceiling. And so many states have provisions in their constitutions that don't even exist in the federal constitution. Things like gift clauses or anti-subsidy clauses. Almost every state has a version of this that says that you can't take taxpayers' money and just give it away to private enterprises, picking winners or losers. You can't subsidize them. You can buy things for the taxpayer, but it's got to be of equal value. And there's protections that protect our privacy to a greater extent than the federal government. Most states have free speech clauses in their constitutions that give you a positive right to speak and express yourself versus what we think of as a negative right in the federal constitution, Congress shall make no law. So Congress can't get in the way, the government can't get in the way of you speaking. And in the state constitutions, it says, no, like you get to speak however you want to speak, so long as you're responsible for that. And so anyway, there also state judges are free to interpret our constitutions however we want, even if they are worded exactly the same as the federal constitution. They can interpret them more restrictive of government and more in favor of freedom. And at the time, very, very few cases were interpreting state constitutions. In fact, the left had really been a lot more active in that than the right. Or the freedom movement. And so it was really neat to just to start doing that type of work. That grew. We had a lot of success in Arizona. We set very important precedents at the Arizona Supreme Court. And so then what we did is we had a lot of our friends in the other SPN groups that said, hey, we would like to do the same thing in our state. So we actually, at the State Policy Network annual meeting, started a session where we trained other groups in how to set up litigation centers. And I remember the very first one where I was sitting with Clint and a couple other folks at a table. There were maybe like 6 of us. And now for anyone who's attended those meetings at the annual meeting, we routinely get like 125 people or so showing up. And we're no longer training groups because so many groups do have their own litigation centers. We're actually just getting everybody together to coordinate and learn from each other. So it's not like we're leading the show. I mean, a lot of groups are doing their own great work and we're all working together. So it's been so cool to see that. And then, of course, Goldwater has significantly stepped up on legislation. So we do education work, as I mentioned, we do tax policy, we do a lot with licensure reform. Healthcare has been really huge for us. Of course, one of the greatest examples of federalism in action, 2 words, not inaction, but in action, is the right to try movement, which was so neat. It's a concept that was, of course, the concept is decades old, that people should have the right, especially when they're terminally ill, to try treatments that could save their lives but aren't fully government approved yet. But nothing was really happening. Patient groups are trying so hard to fight for that freedom at the federal level, and bureaucratic inertia in the FDA and Congress, it went nowhere. So we took that fight to the states. We drafted a state law that would protect people's rights to try those treatments within their states. We passed it in Arizona. We actually had the voters approve it in Arizona, and it got like 88% approval or something like that. And then we went and it was really fun. We got to work with all of our allies in the State Policy Network and patient groups and people on both sides of the political aisle all over the country. 41 states passed right to try laws, blue states, red states, purple states, everything in between. And then as many know, Congress then couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. They took up the issue at the federal level and it got signed into law several years back, and people are being treated. And I think it's just kind of changed a little bit of the way that the bureaucracy is even functioning at the federal level. So it's been fun to watch Goldwater evolve from sort of the little think tank churning out white papers to, truly, obviously an Arizona based, but truly nationally functioning organization for federalism.
Amazing. It's congratulations. I feel like every week when I go through to do my weekly review checks, I see another success story from Goldwater. It's just amazing. And it makes me think, so all of this incredible successes, what about the struggles? Is there
Yeah.
anything that stands out where you were like, oh my gosh, this really knocks me in the teeth? And how did you
Yeah.
overcome that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think one of the biggest struggles was with right to try, believe it or not. When we first were starting to work on the concept, we actually had spoken to some doctors and some patient groups that were informing us of this problem that existed, and how hard it was to work with the FDA when you're on a very short timeline. And you have these treatments that are given to, select few in clinical trials that were lucky enough to get in, but you've got these hundreds or more people that weren't lucky enough to get in, and they're dying and they don't have time to mess around with bureaucratic red tape.
Yeah.
And so again, we did this legal research. We wanted to make sure that what we were doing was defensible in court. We came up with this strategy. It was like, here's a legislative route, here's a court route, because we thought, well, maybe we'll pass it in a few states and the FDA will sue patients who are being treated. And then we can take it to the Supreme Court and get a great precedent. And so we had this whole strategy. And so then, of course, that was going to take money, it was going to take coordination. And we went to funders, foundations, and I won't say we got no support, but early on we got very little, to be honest, because most people just told us that's not possible.
Wow.
They said nobody's going to pass this. No Democrat is ever going to be on board with this. You're not going to, people are not going to want to treat under this. Maybe if it ever became federal law, but they told us it never would. But they're like, if states pass these laws, no one's going to be brave enough to treat under them because they know that the FDA could come after them. And these are all legitimate concerns, don't get me wrong, but we just had, like, people liked the idea of it, but they're like, we don't want to fund fantasy work. It's not going to happen. And to be honest, even some of our allies, we worked with so many folks in the movement, but there were some that felt the same way. And they just said, like, we can't, this is just not possible. We can't get this done. And so it was frustrating because, one thing that I love about the people that work at Goldwater, we work really hard for practical, meaningful solutions that can be done and that are going to affect people's lives. But we are also, like, willing to push the limit and think outside the box. And we had done, like, a lot of research on this, and we had talked to tons of people, and we had done all the legal research. And we were ready to go, and we had a whole campaign, and we were excited, and it felt like nobody was with us. And so, at the time, my role had evolved. So at that point, I was doing more managerial type stuff like I am now. I've gone from kind of like litigating to policy development to lobbying to what I do now, which is oversee a lot of that come together. And I was responsible, I was one of the people that had to make those connections with funders and other organizations to get the support. And I also had to keep our staff excited about it, because if they felt like everybody thought it was a pipe dream, are they going to want to go out there and fight for something that, feels tough? And so certainly wasn't just me that was responsible for that. Our president now, but at the time he was actually in my role, and I was overseeing policy at the time, but Victor Riches, he came up with the idea to start outside of Arizona, which was a first for us. We always started in Arizona, everything we did. But he said, let's go to a purple state. At that time, Arizona was not a purple state. Today, we would have been great for that, but we were a red state at the time. So he said, let's go to a purple state so we can demonstrate to people all across the country, funders, allies, and everyone in between, that this is a concept that has bipartisan support. So we went to Colorado. And we had bipartisan co-sponsors, and it was so enlightening because we've got this Democrat and this Republican, and we're going into committee and we're talking about, how do we talk about this issue of right to try? And so I was talking about patient freedom and, medical freedom. And the Democrats said, no, we can't use the word freedom because that is a trigger word for Democrats. And they're going to think this is a right-wing crazy bill if you talk about freedom. And I'm like, okay,
So interesting.
didn't realize that was controversial, but all right. And I mean, these people were trying to be helpful, but it was so interesting. So I thought, okay. So I said, well, what about like choice? What about medical autonomy and bodily choice? And the Republicans said no, because that will make Republicans think about abortion, which this has nothing to do with, but that they'll think it's a slippery slope, and like, then they won't vote for it. And so we're like, okay, how do we wordsmith this? And that actually we said, okay, let's take a step back and let's just let the people talk for themselves. So rather than make it Goldwater centric, rather than like me go and talk the whole time, or one of my colleagues, we brought a bunch of patients out just to tell their stories, just to say, what was it like, trying to get into a clinical trial and being told no? What was it like when one of your sons was allowed in a clinical trial and another wasn't? So you watched one get better and you watched one get sicker and sicker. What was it like when your mother wasn't able to get a treatment that she could have gotten all across Europe, but couldn't get it in the US? She was too weak to travel and she died. Like, tell those human stories. And that's ultimately, that was the universal thing. That's what got the Republicans and the Democrats to work together. And that's ultimately what got it done in Colorado. And every state after that, we had bipartisan support, many near unanimous. And like when people started seeing that, like little by little, when people saw the patients coming out and telling their stories, then we in Arizona, we decided to send it to the voters to demonstrate popular support. Again, another of Victor's strategies. And like little by little, people were seeing, I realized that in some ways I was frustrated that people didn't believe us. But then I also kind of thought back to the theme of what we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation is that, people don't owe, we hadn't demonstrated that we could do this, and people don't owe that trust to us. We had to earn it. So we did. We went out and we showed that it could be done. And we showed that we could get support and that we could get bipartisan support and that we could get people on board. And then little by little, once we had demonstrated that it could be done, the people came on board and got excited about it and wanted to do it. But, I think everybody who works in the freedom movement, because we're always up against what seems like insurmountable odds, we're up against unlimited resources of the government. It always kind of feels impossible when you first start, and you always have to balance fighting that impossible fight and keeping everybody excited and on track. So I don't think our story is unique, but that's something that I experienced. That once we made it, I mean, then I just felt like, okay, what's next? If we can do this, then we can do anything.
I can't help thinking back to you, Christina, as a child, where you're like, okay, I either pick this up off the floor or I don't, it stays on the ground and I don't have this thing, like that same sort of grit is what's required for doing something like right to try. It seems.
Yeah. It is. And it's funny because it's easy to maybe say, well, that's bravery and that's grit. And I think that's true, but it's also just very practical way of looking at life. I mean, we can choose pessimism or we can choose optimism, or we can choose to fight or not fight. I guess you might not even have to be optimistic about your chances, but I think like when we look at today, it's easy for people to see like how vitriolic politics have become, and our country is definitely in a scary place in a lot of ways. And I think people that do our type of work, it's easy to get, to feel very scared or uncertain about the future, or maybe even feel like, what's the point? And I guess for me, though, it's always, you have two choices in life. You can quit or you can try and keep going. And it just never really seemed hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very hard to push, but it just seems like such an easy choice at the end of the day, because I mean, why quit, right? I mean, why give up? You might as well keep fighting until you can't anymore. And what's the worst that can happen is you end up exactly where you would have ended up if you quit. Except that maybe you won't. Maybe you'll actually get somewhere.
Mhm. Almost an element of faith, I think. We're like, okay, well, let's see. Let's see what happens. Like, we'll put it all out there. And that kind of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth that there was faith, but that's what came to my mind. And that harkens back to what you were talking about earlier with your parents having their home. And this is something that no one can take away from them. And the language that came into mind was almost like, it's sacred. This is a sacred
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, yeah.
When were writing in your book, you quoted a senator, I believe, who said there's a moral directive or component to home ownership. And it strikes me like and you didn't say that exactly, but there is a moral aspect of
Yes.
home ownership. Can you speak to that? It's beyond what is, possible to put into, you don't legislate something that's as you don't legislate sacredness, I suppose you could say.
Yes.
That's in there somehow, and all of this that we're speaking about. What is it about home ownership that is beyond, just having a home?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is sacred is exactly right. I mean, property is sacred, and property, of course, it's more so goes farther back than home ownership, right? It's self-ownership. So
Yeah.
our entire everything we're talking about today, all of our concept of freedom and rights and everything else, I mean, it comes from the truth that I own myself.
Mm.
And you can look at it either way. I mean, you can say it's because it's life is a gift from God, or you can say it's because of, rational existence, whichever way you want to look at it. But self-ownership, either way, we start with that. I own myself. And therefore, in a Lockean sense, right, I own the fruits of my labor. I own my body. I own my thoughts. I mean, property is more than just an item, a phone, a home, clothing. It's property is really all of our rights are really rooted in property rights, because if I don't have the right to own a home, or at least own a space for myself, well, then how am I supposed to practice, how do I have privacy rights, right?
Mhm.
How am I able to have a place where I'm safe and secure in my person and with my family, and we can have that privacy
Mhm.
to ourselves? If you can't own a printing press, then how do
Mhm.
you exercise your right to free speech? If you can't own a firearm, how do you exercise your right, your Second Amendment rights to bear arms, right? So it's actually kind of, to me, a mistake to look, and of course our founders debated this, but to look at rights as being bifurcated. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, no, like these all stem from property rights,
Mhm.
and so, and it is sacred, because again, everything comes back to self-ownership. And so
Mhm.
if I own myself, and that is sacred, and no government or individual can violate that, then by extension, the other things that I create and that I own and that I earn for myself are also sacred. And I think when it comes to something like homeownership, and not everybody needs to own a home in the traditional sense, of course, but this is a place where you make a life for yourself. I mean, when you think about my parents, for example, the cool thing I didn't even mention is that the home that I grew up in, the home that they bought, was actually built by my great grandfather with his own two hands.
Oh, wow. Wow.
He built the house, and then the neat thing is, my parents bought it from his family. They paid every cent, including interest. Like they made, so,
Wow.
which is actually really neat. Some
Yeah,
people are like, why don't they just give it to your parents? And I'm like, oh no, they did not want that. They wanted to earn it.
that's amazing.
But I mean, so that was special, right? Like I grew up there knowing that sometimes when we made Jello and put it in the fridge, it was a little lopsided, but that's because like my grandpa was bending down on his knees, like laying the
Mhm.
floor, and it wasn't perfectly straight the way that maybe floors are in manufactured homes today.
Oh, they're not.
Yeah, yeah, or not, right? You know what? My house never fell down. But anyway, so like, but it's special. And of course you have memories, right? In a home, you have family memories. A home is something you work for. Again, think about my parents, like saving up every single month, taking that check over, to be able to pay that house. How excited they felt when they earned that and they owned that home once they had paid it off. And so a home is a lot more than just a place. I mean, and that's the same of heirlooms. You maybe it's not a house for you, maybe it's like a special necklace that was passed down, or a watch, or um maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's something you use for self-expression. I talk in the
Mhm.
book about that property allows us not only to have things for ourselves, but to express ourselves. So it
Mhm.
might be as simple as
Mhm.
like a t-shirt that has a
Mhm.
slogan on it, or you know the American flag. This
Mhm.
allows me, by owning property, I can tell people, I can tell the world a little bit about myself and who I am, and express myself. And that allows me to communicate with other people, and to sort myself into groups that have nothing to do with superficial things like the color of my skin or my gender, but things that go to my mind and to my beliefs. And that's all because of private property. So yes, this is why societies that don't respect and protect private property are doomed to failure,
Mhm.
and human beings cannot thrive in a system that doesn't protect private property. And I truly believe that every other right it stems from property rights.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And Christina, this hour has just flown by completely. I still have two like burning questions. So do you still have a
Yeah,
few minutes to go over?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I love the lesson that you gave us right now about how you went to Colorado and they said, no, don't use the word freedom. that the Democrats said that because it's such a good lesson. Like we need to be able to okay, you're speaking my language right now when you're saying, oh, the self is sacred. You're speaking
Yeah.
my language, but we need to be able to speak people's languages,
Yes.
And so something that I'm struggling with right now is, you spoke of how it seems like we're getting further and further divided. And people who would, I react one way to freedom, which is very positive, but I also understand the word freedom might not have the same connotation. That makes sense. And if we're going to speak with someone who is on the other side of issues that we're pushing for, I wonder the basic building block, which we drew for so many things, and it rings true with me, is the self is sacred. Does that basic building block still follow on all sides of the partisan divide? And um, how do we speak to that? If that is really where all of these freedoms come from, like that seems like it's kind of a keystone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does. I actually think it does.
Okay.
I think most people, most Americans, despite, how the things that they may say or how crazy their politics might get, I think most of them do believe in the basic concept of freedom and the basic concept of the sanctity of the self, and self-ownership. I don't think our society functions at all if the
Yeah.
majority or even a big minority of people believe that. And so I do think that still stands in America. But I think it just I think people, like you say, they talk in different vocabulary. They talk
Yeah.
past each other. They don't go back to those basics, and then draw a line back to where they're
Yeah.
trying to get. And I sort of have mixed feelings on how to deal with that because on one hand, words are important. Language means something, right? And so
Yes.
if we say, well, the word freedom is it's divisive. So let's just not use it. Well, I mean, but the word means something and it's important. And again, I think a lot of people do coalesce around or agree with the concept.
Mhm.
If we scrub our language of words that just because we think that they might be divisive, then we get to a society like a North Korean society where the government's, deprive people of language so much so that it's not only that they can't communicate, but they can't even think. Yeonmi Park, who escaped North Korea and does a lot of work in the freedom movement today, in her first book, wrote a lot about this, that when she finally made it to South Korea, she was asked things like, what's your favorite color? And just simple questions like that. And she just didn't even have the words to be able to articulate that. She couldn't think because she didn't have words, because without words, she doesn't have concepts. And so again, I mean, I do think it's important that we don't turn into a 1984-esque society where where we're just, it's all, and we see some of this with the way people talk today and their disclaimers and their PC language. And so that's dangerous. But on the same token, we don't have to, if we know that words are not going to reach somebody,
Mhm.
and there's a better word or a better way. Again, what did we do? We talked all about the concept of freedom, but instead of using the word freedom, we just illustrated for these
Mm.
legislators what people's lives are like when they don't have that
Yeah.
freedom. And that spoke to them. And we didn't do ourselves or our movement a disservice. We didn't lie. We didn't tiptoe around the issue. We just said, okay, well, let's talk about freedom. Let's just show them instead of talking about it. So I think we can do that. I think there are ways to not completely let go of things that are important and that people do need to understand without being so, maybe doctrinaire, insistent on using certain words,
Yeah.
that we are just going to turn people off from the get-go, and we're never going to be able to have a conversation, because that's more about fighting and winning, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring people together to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. You told stories. The Goldwater told stories.
Yeah,
And that brings people together all the time in every place.
it
Right.
does.
Okay. Well, thank you for that generous answer. I love it. I'm going to think a lot about it. My last question is, what's new? What's on the horizon? What are your hopes and goals there at Goldwater?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we continue to grow. But I think, as far as like structurally, as the organization continues to grow, it's important to me that, I mean, we've always attracted a very specific kind of person to Goldwater. We're all very different, but the things that we share in common is that everybody here takes their work extremely seriously, but they don't take themselves so seriously. So we work really hard, but we have a lot of fun. And I want to continue to see Goldwater and frankly, the freedom movement generally continue to be that way, to continue to, to know that our work is so critical. It's probably the most critical work that can be done today in our country. And if we fail, it's unfathomable to think, I mean, what would happen? We would lose, a system that allows human beings to thrive and grow. But on the same token, we're so fortunate to be able to do the work that we do, and those of us who get to work in the freedom movement and do this work. I mean, this is a dream to be able to be somebody that contributes even in a very small way to preserving the American dream. And so I want, as Goldwater continues to do the work that we're doing and in the courts and in the capitals and the communities and with all of our allies across the country fighting for freedom, I hope that we always remember that, yes, this is a job, but it's a privilege. And we're lucky that we get to do this. And I'm excited. And that's why, even though it's really easy to get bogged down in just, I mean, you'd be naive to say that these weren't trying times. But I'm optimistic because I have never seen so many people want to be a part of our movement, to be honest. I mean, in my entire lifetime, when I first had that job at the Mackinac Center, I remember talking to people after I decided to go back to law school and having so many people in the freedom movement tell me, you really should do some clerkships at firms because, your chances of getting a job in the freedom movement are pretty slim. Not many people do this type of work. Not many people do this type of litigation. And, you need to have a plan B. It was good advice. I didn't listen to it.
I'm
And
so
it
glad
worked
you
out
didn't.
okay for me. but it was probably good advice. But now, like when I tell our law clerks and interns, of course I mean, I want them to be careful and have a plan B, but I tell them, like, if you really want this and you care and you work for it, there is place for you. There's so much opportunity and there are so many people. And even ever since COVID, we have had people send applications to us for jobs that we don't even have openings for, people who are, have spent their lives in one career and are kind of reevaluating things and thinking like our country is too important. I've done kind of the traditional job and now I want to come back and, give something back and fight the good fight. And I know other groups are experiencing the same thing. And so it's exciting. It's you could look at it and say, well, gosh, it's so depressing that we're in a place where we have to do that. But I also feel just that I feel so blessed to be able to be a part of a movement that is so strong and so driven. And so I think good things are on the horizon. I think our movement is stronger than ever. And I think we've got rough spots to get through, but I truly believe that we'll get through them. And in the meantime, just on a personal level, I think having that gratitude for what we do have, knowing that one day it could all be taken away, is critical. And so I try to find a little bit of joy in every day because, unlike many people, millions and millions and billions of people around the world who aren't free enough to be able to find a little bit of joy in each day, I am, and I'm going to take advantage of that and never take that for granted.
I love it. I love it. I'm ready to go out and just conquer my day from my little part of the movement as well. And I'm just rooting for everything that you've said, and I'm so blown away by your generosity. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's really been a fun conversation and a different one for me.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. And our audience enjoyed it as well. They're saying they love this whole interview. We have one last question, wondering which race you're currently training for.
Oh boy. Well, I trifecta. I am going to be running the Chicago Marathon in the fall. And then I found out I was one of the lucky people that also got into the New York City Marathon. And then I had some friends convince me to sign up for a marathon in Savannah. So I will be running 3 marathons this fall. We'll see. Might be hobbling through a couple of them,
If I see you
but
at an annual meeting in crutches or something, I'll know.
yeah, exactly. But yep. So But you know, again, just like anything else, it's an exciting challenge. I've never done 3 marathons in 5 weeks, so let's see what
Amazing.
happens.
Amazing. All right. Well, exciting times. So thank you so much again. I hope we get to talk more soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us here on Neighbors in the Network. Bye, Christina.
Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Neighbors in the Network, a podcast by the State Policy Network that explores state-based solutions, federalism, and public policy through insightful conversations with incredible individuals working to empower local governance and liberty for all.